Hello guys, Crispy here, welcome back to another video. In this one, my friends, I'm going to be testing the GeForce RTX 3080 Ti in Senua's Saga Hellblade 2. This one is the Founders Edition model of the card. We are running it with the latest Nvidia drivers and I'm not manually overclocking it. You can see all of its specs right here in Tech Power-Up's GPU Z. Resizable power is also enabled. And over on the left, I'm pairing it with a Ryzen 9 7950X3D with half of its cores disabled, so it's basically the same as a Ryzen 7 7800X3D, and 32 gigabytes of DDR5 6000 MHz RAM in dual channel. Let's get into it, shall we? Alright, let's go over the settings first. I'm starting at 1080p resolution using DLSS set to DLAA, which means that we're only utilizing the anti-aliasing part of DLSS, so it's native resolution still, and we're using the high settings preset right here, which are maxed out settings. Okay, so we're starting here. This is where we started with the RTX 4060 as well, just so we can compare things a little bit, you know. It's doing a much better job than that card. I usually see some people that don't understand a lot of things about graphics cards. That's normal, of course, right? The average person doesn't know much about GPUs. But yeah, they ask me whether the 4060 is better than like a 3090 or a 3080 and stuff like that. And the answer is obvious if you watched the last video. You know, this is way better than the RTX 4060. That GPU was getting 30 to 35 FPS in this little section where we were. This one is getting 60 to 60 something, 60 to 70 actually right now, 72 frames per second. So that's a massive difference right there. Obviously a completely different experience here with the RTX 3080 Ti. The only bad thing about this GPU compared to the 4060 is that this doesn't have the frame generation from DLSS, you know, DLSS 3 frame generation, unfortunately. So we can't really utilize that to improve our FPS further, whereas with the 4060 we could. But the 4060, even with frame generation enabled over DLAA at 1080p and the high settings, it still couldn't touch the frame rates that we're seeing here with the RTX 3080 Ti. So this is a much better card. It also consumes like 3 times as much power. You can see it right there, 350 watts sometimes. It's a 350 watt GPU. It's absolutely insane, and it's about to get really toasty here in my room at the moment. Because the longer I play with the 3080 Ti, the more heat I dump into my room, of course. Anyway, yeah, it's hanging in there pretty well, guys. It already dropped FPS into the 50s. Also, I gotta mention this, and I keep forgetting about it. I removed the black bars that come on by default here in Senua's Hellblade 2. And those black bars were put there, supposedly, to give a more cinematic look. But I think it was just because the performance was so terrible that putting black bars over the top and the bottom of the screen actually makes it so you don't need to render as much, and you end up getting quite a few more FPS, okay? So there's that. But I want to play at 1080p resolution. You know, they still say that you're playing at 1080p even with the black bars, and you really aren't, because you're not rendering the top and the bottom of the screen. Now, that smoke is very intensive over here. It's dropping down into the mid-50s, whereas the RTX 4060 was dropping down to the 20s. So again, it's a massive difference, and this is a much, much better experience than what the 4060 can provide, and even like the 4060 Ti. It's only with the 4070 that you start getting close to this performance, but even the 4070 is only matching a 3080, not the 3080 Ti in terms of performance. Now, I'm gonna go ahead and leave this area right here, just like I did with the 4060, and I'm gonna load the first one. All right, here we go. This is where things start getting really intensive. So far, it's been above 60 FPS. Right now, it's starting to drop to like the high 40s, low 50s, mid 50s most of the time. I'm actually going to start counting our FPS as well. There we go. Big drop right now, maybe? No, not really. Okay, 51 FPS was the minimum there. I mean, 49 was the minimum before it, but yeah, it's about to drop a little bit further than that, but it's good to see that it can handle, even in intensive cutscenes, about 40 plus frames per second the entire time. That's impressive, considering this is UE5 with ray tracing enabled and so on. It's very, very intensive stuff once again. And it also probably has the best game visuals so far, right? 55, 51, 49 again. Exactly the same drop as we've seen previously. it's still good. I mean, for a cinematic title like this one, linear game as well, where all you do is press W, sometimes you fight someone here and there. Ooh, 41, 43. Yeah, it's definitely doable. It's doable even with drops into the 30s, low 30s, and I would argue even low 20s sometimes. You know, like if the worst it drops to is 25, for example, or 23, in a very intensive cutscene for a second or so, it's still fine. Now, the thing is, we've been playing it, or testing it actually, because I haven't really played much. It's only now that I'm able to walk around and see things, you know. But yeah, we've been doing it at the 1080p resolution, which is very low for a 3080 Ti. Chances are, if you have this GPU, you have at least a 1440p monitor, and back when it came out, it was a great 4K GPU in 2022. So you might even have a 4K monitor with it, and that's why I'm gonna stop it right there and change the settings a little bit. First up, I'm just gonna select quality DLSS to see the bump in frame rate that we get. So we were getting 60 FPS, now we're getting 90 FPS. It's quite a bit higher, it's 50% more FPS, guys. That's good. That means that it will put us above 60, 100% of the time at 1080p with quality DLSS. But again, like, it's 1080p, right? I don't think a lot of people with this GPU are playing at 1080p. And now we're playing at 1440p resolution using DLAA, so it's still native res using the high settings or max settings, whatever you want to call it. It's the same thing. And apparently the 3080 Ti at 1440p resolution is still better than the 4060 is at 1080p. The target resolution of the 4060, you know. Still 40s and 50s. I wonder how much it will drop to in those areas with a lot of smoke, you know, because that drops a lot usually. 41 right there. It's getting way more intensive at the moment. It's also looking so much better at 1440p, at least in the monitor that I'm utilizing here at 32 inches, of course. But in general, 1440p, even at the same size, even on a 24-inch monitor, you can notice the difference in PPI. It's so much more detailed at 1440. And the fact that this is still able to provide 40 plus FPS, at least at the moment, and probably 30 plus FPS all of the time, in intensive cutscenes and so on, means that, yeah, I would actually pick the 1440p resolution over the 1080p one. You know, if this was a first-person shooter, I would say, yes, sure, drop it down to 1080p, achieve those 60 plus FPS all of the time. Heck, drop it to medium settings as well, which still looks great, you know, and you do gain a bit of performance. But no. Here in this one, I want to check it out maxed out because, first of all, it's kind of a benchmark these days, right? It's the best looking game that we have at the moment in the market, and I want to push it to the absolute maximum with these GPUs and see what they're capable of. And second, it's a very linear title, kind of walking simulator, you could say. A lot of people say that. And it's slow-paced. It works great even with 30 plus FPS, as I told you. And I wouldn't even mind a couple of drops here and there into the 20s. All right, there we go. So we got 45 FPS average there. I think the minimum we've seen over there with the smoke was 37 or 38. Over here it dropped to 35, which is a little bit more intensive. But yeah, it's definitely very playable here with this GPU at the 1440p native resolution. And the thing is, if you wanted to, you could even enable some DLSS, and I think I would do that at 1440p because it looks very good. So I'll enable quality DLSS. Things are slightly softer as expected, but really only ever so slightly softer. It's not really that noticeable, especially if you have a 1440p 27-inch monitor. You shouldn't really be able to tell the difference with DLSS quality and native resolution. It still looks very good and sharp, especially because it is applying sharpening over the upscaled image, which is quite nice. And now you can see it right here where we were dropping to like 38 FPS and in the 40s most of the time. It is getting 60 plus. Yeah, I think this is how I'd play this game and how I'd enjoy it with the 3080 Ti, guys. You likely have a 1440p monitor with it as well, and I think it's just a good experience like this. Very, very smooth one. It will still drop inevitably, okay, in cutscenes and so on, but it is going to be super enjoyable like this. I like it. Let me just go back to this area. And you know what? This cutscene is absolutely huge, so I'm just gonna skip it, go to this area right here. It would drop into like the 40s. Minimum would probably be like 45. Kind of similar to what we saw at 1080p resolution, you know. But while you're playing the game, not in the cutscene, even here in the starting area, it is holding those 60 plus FPS all of the time. Honestly, it's a beast of a GPU still. Even these days, even in a super demanding title like this one. All you need to do is add a little bit of DLSS and you're all good with 3080 Ti. This GPU keeps on impressing me, actually. I thought it was going to do quite a bit worse than it actually is doing. Alright, next up, let's go up to 4K resolution. Okay. Alright, here we go. I'm gonna set it to DLAA again, so it's native 4K resolution, guys. High settings, still maximum. And here we are, 27 FPS, 26 right there. Obviously, this is completely unplayable at this point. If you had the black bars enabled, it would probably be in the 30s, actually, because it gets, again, quite a bit more FPS, since it's not rendering the top and bottom of the screen. But yeah, at the native 4K and true 4K resolution, well, 4K UHD, the true 4K is 4096 pixels wide and 2160 pixels vertical, right? But yeah, this is 16:9 4K, and it's not even reaching 30 FPS. Even here in this scene, it's dropping further than what we saw so far, actually. It's not gonna be great, basically, okay? There's no way around it. This is a bad experience, so I'm gonna go ahead and enable DLSS on quality right away. This should provide us with a much better experience, and it should be playable from now on. Yep, 40s.
Like I said.
So it's getting around the same as 1440p was, right? 1440p native res. That means that we will get around like 30 plus 100% of the time. Maybe it will dip into the 20s in those cutscenes that are super demanding, but it's not a bad experience at all. It's only in cutscenes after all where it's going to drop, and everywhere else it's going to be a smooth 40 FPS experience. No stutters. The motion blur makes it feel a little bit smoother than it actually is at the same time, and also a little bit cinematic as well. And the DLSS quality at 4K, by the way, I can't really tell a difference at all. I mean, I've tried it with the 4080 Super, side by side, disabling it and re-enabling DLSS, you know. I couldn't really tell a difference. It looks basically the same. Maybe in those little branches it's noticeable. There's a little bit more shimmering there, but it's so minor that it doesn't matter. And even with a super high-end GPU like a 4090, I would still utilize DLSS quality in this particular title. Or in that case, actually, I would go for frame generation instead of DLSS quality, since the base FPS should be high enough for frame generation not to introduce a ton of input lag, you know. And usually FG does look a little bit better than just DLSS quality. But either way, it's going to look fantastic and play fantastic. With the 4080 Super, at least it did, with frame generation enabled, plus DLSS quality, it was still looking amazing at 4K res. So there's that. Over here, 37, 35, 36 at times with the smoke. Frame time graph shows a little bit of stuttering here and there, like those little spikes, but it's not noticeable. And if you wanted to, I think you could use like a 30 FPS lock for a flat frame time graph all of the time, and that will make it so it is just smooth as butter. Well, not butter, because butter would be 60 FPS, right? But smooth as a sponge, right? And those sponges that you use to clean the plates, the green part of the sponge, which is a little bit rough. But it's consistent at least, right? But honestly, guys, I wouldn't really lock the FPS. This is stable enough for me with 40 frames per second. It looks absolutely phenomenal with the UE5 Lumen ray tracing, nanite. It's awesome. It's a great experience, even with the RTX 3080 Ti. Thanks very much for watching. Look at all of that detail, by the way. Damn, those rocks are phenomenal looking. Jesus. Maybe I'm gonna try one more thing. Just quickly going to enable DLSS performance, because this sometimes looks pretty good still. Ooh, I can see a lot of trailing on the particles that are flying. Look at that. Yeah, that's ugly. That's an ugly look. I didn't notice that with DLSS quality. Let me check if it happens as well. Nope, with DLSS quality, it happens on the particles that are far away. Wait, no, all of them almost. All right, I didn't notice it. What about with DLAA? Oh, I see why that happens. It's because of the motion blur. There's still a little bit of a trail because of the motion blur, but it's emphasized by DLSS, basically. Anyway, it's a minor thing. I can live with that. So yeah, 4K quality DLSS is the way to go. Over in performance DLSS, things are still very good looking, but I can see a lot of shimmering around the character model when I turn the camera around. You can probably see it on YouTube as well, although the compression will wreck everything basically. But yeah, that's very noticeable at this point. It's not enough to achieve 60 FPS plus all of the time either. I mean, it's already in the 50s, right? So yeah, just stick to quality DLSS, in my opinion. Enjoy those beautiful visuals. Maybe use optimized settings as well. I'm just doing a benchmark with max settings because I want to see what it's capable of. But yeah, that's been it for this one. Thanks very much for watching. Hope you enjoyed. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't already. I'll catch you in the next one very soon. Love you all. Bye-bye.